Okay, I think we can begin now. So we are on chapter 3, La naturaleza y el medio ambiente. So nature and the environment. There's a lot of vocabulary here uh, dealing with the environment, since that's the theme here. So please familiarize yourself with the vocabulary surrounding el medio ambiente. There's a lot of exercises here, a lot of readings, and you will have readings on your chapter 13 exam in a couple of weeks. So I want you to be familiar with the vocabulary. A lot of the vocabulary is a cognate or are cognates with English, but still make sure you're familiar with this vocabulary. And on the last page of every chapter, there's a full compendium of the vocabulary. And as we go through this section, and we're going to go through communication, comunicación, vocabulario, and the estructura, the grammar right now. And there's a lot of examples and chances for us to use the vocabulary. So the first concept here in comunicación or communication that they want us to be aware of is the idea of how do we say should. And we use the conditional form of deber, which is deber is the verb must. Debería, and debería means should. Usted debería. So make sure that you know this phrase, and you should, and then you use the infinitive after it. You use debería with an infinitive. So let's take a look. Todos deberíamos, we all should, deberíamos cuidar, to take care of el planeta. All right, we should all take care of the planet. Todos deberían, everyone should ayudarse, should help one another. Okay. All right. I believe there's a little box here on debería. And again, you can look at this. To talk about what you think you or someone else should do, use debería. Okay, usted debería andar. So we use the verb, the conditional form of debería with the infinitive. Debería, you should what? Andar en bicicleta, use a bike or ride a bike, en vez de ir, in place of going by car. Okay, so these are things you can do to help the environment, and be aware of things that you can do or others can do to help the environment. A lot of this unit talks about this, and so you need to be able to talk about the vocabulary. Deberíamos reciclar. Deberíamos, we should recycle. Again, reciclar is a verb to recycle, and we use the infinitive with debería or a form of debería. Here's the to form, tú deberías or tú no deberías. You should not contaminar. Very important word. Contaminar means to what? To pollute. And then ustedes deberían cuidar el planeta. You all should take care of. Cuidar means to take care of the planet. And let's look at some other things we can do and start familiarizing ourselves with this vocabulary. Deberíamos ahorrar agua. We should ahorrar, save water. Deberíamos evitar. We should avoid. Deberíamos hacer abono. We should make fertilizer con los desechos orgánicos, with organic remains. For example, if you eat a banana, the peel is a desecho, okay? And you could use that to make abono by composting. I'm sorry, abono by composting. Deberíamos proteger. Proteger means to protect el mar, the sea. So here's some of those verbs associated with el medio ambiente, and you should be familiar with them. Deberíamos reciclar. We should recycle. And here's some examples. So you should be able to start to become comfortable with this vocabulary. Okay, here's another concept in communication. How would we ask somebody, how long have you been recycling? And there's two ways. We could use, so you want to ask somebody how long they've been doing something, studying at GTC, recycling, or Working, how long have you been working in the environmental movement? How do you ask such a question? There's two ways. You can use cuánto tiempo llevas, and then you use the present participle, ando, yendo. So, how long have you been studying? ¿Cuánto tiempo llevas tú estudiando? Literally, how long have you been, how long have you been carrying, studying? ¿Cuánto tiempo llevas estudiando? ¿Cuánto tiempo llevas reciclando? Or we can ask it with this construction. ¿Cuánto tiempo hace que? How long has it been? How long does it make that? And then you just use the present tense. ¿Cuánto tiempo hace que tú reciclas? Just use the present tense. Okay. So in this one, ¿cuánto tiempo llevas tú? And then I use the ing form of the verb, the present participle, reciclando or estudiando. ¿Cuánto tiempo llevas estudiando en GTC? How long have you been studying at GTC? Or I could ask it this way. ¿Cuánto tiempo hace que tú estudias en GTC? So here I use the present participle. Here I just use the present tense. Take a look at these, okay? You'll have a question on this, and it's pretty easy, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Okay. All right. Here's, go through this section and make sure you look at the examples, do the exercises, and do the readings. There's going to be quite a few short readings on your exam. They're going to ask you about different environmental things. It's not technical information they're looking for. They just want to see if you understand what's being said. So here's a section on a lago Enriquillo in the Dominican Republic. You may have something like this on your exam, where they talk about a lake and its environmental implications for the Dominican Republic, and they might ask you a few questions. Okay, so now let's move on here into vocabulario. And again, I told you, please look at the vocabulary. Go through these on page 388. Go through these examples. Many of the terms, environmental terms, are in Spanish are cognates with English, and you should be able to understand them. Some you may have had before, but look through them. So let's take a quick look. Nuestro medio ambiente means environment, our environment. And it says, hay varias causas de la deforestación. There are many causes of what? Deforestation. All right. El descuido de una persona can what? So if someone is uncareful with a cigarette, it can causar la quema, the burning of bosques. Bosques are forests. Okay, so the word for bosque is forest. Matando muchos árboles y animales, killing many animals, trees and animals. La agricultura, agriculture, y la ganadería, cattle raising, ocupan mucha tierra, so they take up a lot of land. All right. And what do they require? They require la tala, the cutting of trees. Okay, so la tala is to cut or clear trees. All right, y la destrucción de bosques, and the destruction of what? Forests. And what forests can be destroyed? Well, la selva amazónica. Selva means jungle. So when we think of the Amazon, we think of the selva. Maybe when we think of the forests up north, we think of bosque. So bosque means forest, selva means jungle. And it says la selva son los bosques, like the selva amazónica, are in what? Peligro, in danger. All right. There's a thing called the food chain. Cadena means chain. Alimenticia, food. La cadena alimenticia. Okay, just be familiar with these terms. Okay, here's another term, la extinction of species, las especies, species of plants and animals. So please look through this. Um, Here's some of the things, the peligros that confront our world. La sequía is what? A drought. Okay, tormentas are storms. Okay, calentamiento global, global warming. So go through this and familiar yourself with these terms. All right. Um, they talk about activism, right? You want people involved in the environmental movement. So you want, it says varios grupos de activists luchan, they fight para proteger, in order to protect the environment, el medio ambiente, and to prohibir la contaminación. Contaminación means pollution, to prohibit pollution and salvar and save animals. So contaminación means pollution. Contaminar is to pollute. All right, so this is good vocabulary. Look through these. Here's some especies en peligro de extinción. Look through these. Okay, familiarize yourself with it. You'll have some readings on this. Okay, now let's get to estructura. Okay, and this starts on page 392, and it's really going back to the subjunctive. You should all know how to form the subjunctive tense. They just go into more detail here, and they want you to know how to put verbs in the subjunctive. We already know how to do this, all right? We get the stem of the verb, or we can take the yo form of the verb and drop the o. If it's an AR verb, we put E endings on it. How do we form the subjunctive of ER and IR verbs? We get the stem of the verb, or we could take the yo form and drop the o. And if it's an ER, IR verb, we put A endings on it. Again, this is, you should know this already. Now we have irregular subjunctives, and most of the irregular subjunctives derive from the irregular yo verbs you learned a long time ago, those verbs that were only irregular in the yo form, like yo digo, poner, yo pongo, okay? Venir, yo vengo, yo tengo. Notice they're only irregular really in the yo form. And so those verbs, you will get that's why I say take the yo form, drop the o, and now put your endings on. So if we have an AR verb, we put E endings. If we have an ER, IR verb, we put A endings. So drop the O of the irregular yo form and add on your endings, and that's how you form the subjunctive. And then there are a couple verbs, ir and poner, that are not irregular yo verbs. They're totally irregular, and you have to memorize the subjunctive form. Okay, these verbs are used over the centuries all the time, and they evolve and change. That's why they become maybe more irregular. But let's take a look at these. Okay, so let's move on here. So here's just a little chart with the irregular yo verbs. I don't know why they didn't put decir here, but they didn't. But here are your irregular yo verbs. So what they've done here is you get the irregular yo form of the verb. So for hacer, it's yo hago, and you drop the o, as I told you, and the book tells you, and then you add on your irregular you add on your irregular endings. I'm sorry, you add on your subjunctive endings. So for ER verbs, we add A endings. So yo hago, drop the o. Now I add on my subjunctive endings. It's an ER verb, so they're going to be A. Yo haga, tú hagas. AS ending is added on for tú, and A is added on for ella. Él haga. AMOS for nosotros, que nosotros hagamos. And finally, for ellos, ustedes, it's an AN ending, hagan. What about poner? So the the irregular yo form is yo pongo. I drop the o from pongo. Now it's an ER verb, so I put a endings on it. Yo ponga, tú pongas, él ponga, nosotros pongamos, ellos pongan. What about salir? Salgo. So I drop the o, yo, and it's an IR verb, so I've put on a endings. Que yo salga, tú salgas, él salga, nosotros salgamos, ellos salgan. And the same for tener, tengo, tenga, and traer. It's traigo, traiga. Okay. These are all ER, IR verbs, so they're all going to have the A endings when you form the subjunctive. And the last one is decir, digo, diga. Yo diga, tú digas. Okay, so take a look at those and make sure you know them. In fact, here they are. Okay, decir is there. These are the two verbs. They're not irregular yo verbs per se, as the other ones were. They're just completely irregular in the subjunctive, and you must remember them or memorize them. So it's yo vaya, to go, tú vayas, as ending, él vaya, nosotros vayamos, and ellos vayan. So here the ending will be an A, AS, A, AMOS, AN. What about ser? Sea, that you be. Tú, que usted, I'm sorry, that I be. Yo sea. Tú seas. Que él sea. Que seamos and sean. Make sure you know those. All right. And here they give the both forms. I wouldn't worry so much about those. Again, go through these readings, get yourself familiar with some of this environmental vocabulary. Okay, and let me see. Okay. And these verbs can, in some cases, they just want you to be familiar with these verbs because when they test on the subjunctive, often these verb phrases are used. So there'll be a clause starting out with one of these verbs. In the second clause, you're either going to use the subjunctive or you're not, but they often use these verbs. So creer means to believe, I believe. Espero, I hope. Pensar, I think or believe. And saber, I know. Okay. Creer shows certainty, right? Pensar shows certainty. Saber, certainty, I know. Esperar shows desire, what you want. Okay. Volition, and that will affect whether you use the subjunctive or not in the after those verbs. Okay, so let's go back here and we'll go to Estructura 13.2. Okay, when there's the subjunctive is used when there's disbelief or uncertainty. All right. So let's see here what they tell us. Okay. 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 So let's take a look at number 0.3 here. Expressions such as es imposible que, no es cierto que, no es verdad que, require the use of the subjunctive after them. Why? Because what follows them, at least in the mind of the speakers, is not true. There's disbelief. So if somebody goes, no es cierto que, it's not certain that you can, notice, why do we use the subjunctive? Because the person is disbelieving, they're showing uncertainty. No es cierto que tú puedas, as ending, shows me immediately it's the subjunctive, right? If it were just the regular present indicative, it would be an es ending. So when we have a statement like this, always use the subjunctive. Antonio piensa que. Okay, Antonio believes that. Now here's a second clause and a third clause. The second clause says, no, this should really read, no es verdad que. So if I say it is not true that, what am I showing? Disbelief, uncertainty. I've got to use the subjunctive. No es verdad que tú seas un estudiante. It can't be true that you're a student. All right. So with these expressions, no es verdad que, no es cierto que, always use the subjunctive. Okay. Now, what if I make the positive statement, though, where I show I am certain, I am clear, there's no doubt, es cierto que, es verdad que, es obvio que, then we just use the simple present indicative tense. Never use a subjunctive here. You see the difference? Here, there's doubt. Here, there's no doubt. So when there's no doubt, just use the regular present indicative tense. Never use a subjunctive. Everybody see that? Here there's doubt, subjunctive in the second clause. Here there's no doubt, regular present tense in the second clause. That's the basic idea. Okay, so look through these exercises and let me see if there's anything. Look at some of these readings on the environment. Again, you're going to get small readings on your chapter 13 test, and you should be familiar with the vocabulary. Now let's go to 13.3 and finish up with estructura and the subjunctive. The subjunctive purpose and contingency. So let's take a look and what do they want to tell us about it? Okay, based on what you saw in para empezar, which form of the verb is used after para que? After para que, we always use the indicative or just simple present tense. Oh, I'm sorry, my mistake, misspoke. After para que, we always use the subjunctive. Okay, so whenever you see para que, it should trigger the use of the subjunctive. And para que means in order that. So you're going to have a clause. He goes to school in order that he can become a doctor. Okay. I eat a lot in order that I can gain weight. All right. When you use para que, that second clause will always go into the subjunctive. So you see para que, immediately subjunctive. So let's take a look. Voy a hablar muy despacio. I'm going to speak slowly. Para que me entiendas. AS ending, it should be ES if it were present tense, but it's subjunctive, so it's AS. So this phrase always triggers a subjunctive. It's going to be on your test. When you get a question like that, use the subjunctive after para que. Okay. In this example, you speak slowly because you want the other person to hear you. The meaning of para que is similar to that of querer. So they see para que meaning something like querer. And if you remember, we always use the subjunctive after querer whenever we have a thing of volition, something we want or desire. And in a sense, they're saying we want or desire this result. So after para que, we're going to use the subjunctive. You saw in chapter 12 that querer que is always again followed by the subjunctive. Quiero que tú me entiendas. So whenever you desire or want something for somebody, you're going to also use the subjunctive. So after querer, and every time you have para que, you will use the subjunctive after para que. Here's another term. These are, just remember this, en caso de que, in case that, or in the event that. So whenever you have a verb phrase following en caso de que, always in the subjunctive. Always use the subjunctive. Let's take a look. En caso de que llueva, not llueve, but llueva, in case that it rains, always use the subjunctive. En caso de que no encuentres, in case that tú no encuentres, notice we use the subjunctive after en caso de que. En caso de que expresses what might happen. So it's not certain. So it's one of those uncertain things. That's where we're using it. Its meaning is very similar to es posible que. So if you start off a sentence, es posible que, it's possible that, but it's also not. You're showing uncertainty, so you will always use the subjunctive. Es posible que llueva. So whenever you introduce any uncertainty, use the subjunctive. Don't use the simple present tense. Okay, what about por qué? Okay, expressions that simply introduce a fact. Okay, you're not speculating it. You are followed by the indicative or the simple present form. So, por qué? Because. All right. So whenever after because, you're always going to use just the simple present tense. Never use a subjunctive. You're just making a factual statement. You're not introducing. Certainly. So let's take a look. Voy a hablar muy despacio. I'm going to speak slowly because, porque, a veces, sometimes, tú no me entiendes. Notice, entiendes is just a simple present. We do not use a subjunctive. So never use a subjunctive after porque. Llámame porque va a llover. Call me because it's going to rain. Not porque vaya, but porque va. Just use a simple present. And take a look at this chart. This is very good. And it'll, again, I think, clarify a lot of things for you. When do we use just the simple present tense, indicativo? And when do we use the subjunctive? Let's take a look. Yo sé que las tortugas están bien. So saber is certainty. I just use the simple present tense. Pensar, I believe, I think. Certainty. So I just use the simple present tense. Pienso que ahorras. So I use the simple present. Agua. I think that you save water. And then, te voy a invitar a la playa. ¿Por qué? I'm going to invite you to the beach. Porque tú eres, because you are. So I just use the simple present. Now, when do I use the subjunctive? And watch out for these statements on your exam. Quiero. Volition, desire. Quiero que las tortugas estén. So now I'm using the subjunctive. I recommend something to you. It's kind of like want this for you. Te recomiendo que ahorres agua. I recommend that you save water. Ahorrar is an adverb, but has an es ending here. Why? It's in the subjunctive. Te voy a invitar a la playa. ¿Para qué? In order that. ¿Para qué? Always triggers the subjunctive. Para que tú seas mi amigo, so that you'll be my friend. Here's the idea of doubt or uncertainty. No creo. I don't believe. I use the subjunctive. Es posible que. I use the subjunctive. El pájaro sea. And en caso de que veas, in case you see. Okay. I always use the subjunctive because there's uncertainty. All right. All right. Notice here, though, I know, I think. It's not negative. They're both very clearly certain. I know that the turtles are, so I use the simple present tense. Pienso, I believe, so I use the simple present tense. But here, I have negative. No creo, no pienso. So I'm going to use the subjunctive. All right. And let me see if there's any. So I would suggest you just look through this. It goes into a little more detail. And finally, here's a section on el ecoturismo in Peru. You might want to look through that and answer some of those questions because you're going to have little short readings on your chapter 13 test. And then on the last page of the chapter, please look through this and familiarize yourself again in the comunicación section with how do you say should. How would you ask somebody, how long have you been recycling? There's two ways. ¿Cuánto tiempo llevas reciclando? Or ¿cuánto tiempo hace que reciclas? In one, you're going to use the present participle, reciclando, or in the other one, you're going to just use the present tense of the verb, que tú reciclas. And here are many of your environmental terms. Look through them. A lot of these terms are cognates with English. And I think that does it for chapter 13. So I think we are done with this lesson. Okay.